Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gallery Teachers Masterclass. My name is Ania Kolbuszewska, and our today's topic is regulating emotions. In an iconic 1987 movie directed by Oliver Stone, Wall Street, the main character, Gordon Gekko, who was played by a very young Michael Douglas, says this: "Lunch? Oh, you've got to be kidding. Lunch is for wimps." The 1990s, the next decade, in Poland, where I come from, but also in the whole world, was a time when we really believed that we could achieve anything under the sun as long as we worked hard or even harder. In Central and Eastern Europe, this was a really special time when, after the fall of the communist regimes, we finally had an opportunity to build a world as we wanted it to be. But of course, this required a lot of work and no weekends and no holidays and being on call 24/7 and not complaining about it, because after all, this was a historic chance for us. The picture that you can see on the screen is me in the first half of the 1990s. I also believed that the key to success is hard work and dedication, and that personal costs are negligible, and that you really don't have to stop and think about how you feel, because emotions are simply not part of the business equation. In fact, until the 1980s, a lot of psychologists viewed feelings as kind of disturbing noise, and they thought that our feelings slow us down and they don't allow us to achieve our goals. We have all heard the message, get over it, stop focusing on yourself, don't be so sensitive, time to move on. The irony, though, is that when we ignore feelings or suppress them, they only become stronger. The cost of working too fast, too hard, for too long, and of not taking care of our emotional needs only started being discovered and researched not a long time ago, when a lot of people had already suffered severe emotional burnout. So what does this have to do with regulating emotions, and why do we need to explore feelings? When we think about emotions, we realize that to stop feeling would be like to stop thinking or breathing, simply impossible. And yet, very often we go through life pretending that we don't feel or that we can stop feeling whenever we wish. Our true feelings can be very messy, very inconvenient, confusing. They leave us vulnerable. They make us do things that we wish we hadn't done. And so they scare us sometimes. They seem to be so much out of our control. Very often, we do our best to deny them or to hide them, even from ourselves. Our attitudes towards emotions get passed along to our children, who learn by mimicking their parents and their teachers. Emotions are like a balloon filled with water. If you keep squeezing too hard or for too long, the water will simply explode out. And when that happens, it can be a very traumatic experience. Often we have no idea why it happened and what's behind it. We can't recognize, let alone name, the emotions behind the outburst. And if we can't recognize and name them, we can't really find a long-lasting way of dealing with these emotions. And this is what today's session is about learning to make our emotions work for us and not against us. Let's remember that you don't need to have suffered an emotional or physical trauma to struggle with the effects of your emotions being ignored or disregarded. A lot of people grow up in homes where emotional issues are ignored because no one ever learned how to talk about them and to take actions to address them. And when this happens, we go into emotional lockdown, survival mode. And the consequences of going into survival mode simply cannot be ignored. And they range from inability to relax, feeling threatened by any comments, having moods being very short-tempered, struggling to focus, um, having a real difficulty relaxing. We also can suffer from impaired memory, and we can have issues coping with even really small inconveniences. Emotions can also be translated into money. It's estimated that worldwide mental health problems could cost the global economy up to $16 trillion by 2030, and that's in only 5 years' time. And these include direct costs of healthcare and medications, but also of other therapies, and also indirect costs, such as, for example, loss of productivity. Ironically, we seem to prefer spending more money and effort on dealing with the results of our emotional problems rather than trying to prevent them. There are 5 areas where our feelings matter most. First, our emotional state determines where we direct our attention, and because of that, what we remember and what we learn. Second is decision making. When we are overcome by very strong emotions, doesn't matter if they are pleasant or unpleasant, we see the world differently, and the choices that we make at that moment are, of course, influenced. Third is social relations. What we feel and how we interpret other people's feelings send signals to approach or avoid, to make friends or to distance ourselves. Fourth is the influence of emotions on our health. Emotions cause different physiological reactions within our bodies and brains, releasing very powerful chemicals which affect our physical and mental well-being. And the fifth has to do with creativity, effectiveness, and performance. In order to achieve goals, get good grades, thrive at work, we need to learn to use our emotions as though they were tools. And guess which of these 5 areas are important for learning? Every single one of them. At the end of August 2024, so only a few months ago, a new Nature Human Behavior study, which was led jointly by 2 ladies from 2 London universities, was published. And the study has revealed what we can only call the hidden key to academic success. It revealed that non-cognitive skills such as motivation and self-regulation, and this is exactly what we're talking about today, are as important as intelligence in determining academic success. But of course, before we think about our students, it might be useful to look at how well we, the teachers and the managers, self-regulate. What you can see on the screen are a number of strategies which are very commonly used in situations where we are dealing with strong or even overwhelming emotions. Do any of these strategies look familiar to you? I certainly recognize at least a few, with my all-time favorite being avoidance. So, how effective and constructive are those strategies? Well, first of all, these are strategies that we generally learned very early, mostly in our childhood or in adolescence. And we learned them from people who had no emotional intelligence training. They happen automatically, and because of that, they really require very little effort. And they provide immediate, but unfortunately, very short-lived relief because they are not a solution to the problem. I may be avoiding an issue for as long as I want, but this is not going to solve the problem. They are also harmful to ourselves and to other people. They negatively influence our relationships. They prevent us from reaching goals. They ruin our physical and mental health. Overall, they become habits which are very difficult to break. Not very constructive, is it? So, what is healthy regulation of our emotions? Now, the definition which I will show you in a moment is adapted from a book which I highly recommend. The title of the book is Permission to Feel. So the definition is this: healthy emotional regulation are thoughts and actions which we use to manage emotions. And by managing emotions, we mean preventing, reducing, initiating, maintaining, enhancing. And we manage those emotions in order to promote well being, to build positive relationships, to make sound, informed decisions, and to attain our goals. There are a lot of strategies, healthy strategies, which we can use to self regulate. We don't really have time to talk about all of them in detail, but you can see that they range from physiological regulation, such as, for example, mindful breathing, through self care, through good nutrition, exercise, sleep, building healthy relationships, managing your thoughts, and managing your life smartly, to doing meaningful things which you really enjoy. And finally, forgiveness. In other words, giving ourselves the permission to fail and feeling self compassion. One specific method we can use is known by its acronym RULER. RULER is an acronym for the 5 skills of emotional intelligence. The first is recognizing our own emotions and emotions experienced by other people, from what we think, what we feel, what we say, and also from facial expressions, body language, voice, and other nonverbal signals that other people send us. The second is understanding those feelings and determining their source, and then being able to see how they influence our behaviors. Third is being able to name these emotions with vocabulary which is as nuanced as possible. The fourth is expressing our feelings in accordance with cultural norms and social contexts. And the last one is regulating emotions rather than letting them regulate us. And the first 3 skills allow us to accurately identify and decode what we and what other people feel. And the 2 remaining skills tell us how we can manage these emotions to achieve the outcomes that we would like to achieve. One very important point which I would like to make here is that learning the emotion regulation skills and improving the way that we respond to our feelings does not mean that we'll suddenly become happy all the time. Perpetual happiness simply cannot be our goal, because this is just not how real life works. But what we need is the ability to experience and express all emotions, to regulate emotions in order to achieve greater well-being, make better decisions, have better relationships, and realize our potential. So let's look very briefly at each of the ruler skills. The first skill, recognizing the occurrence of emotion by noticing a change in our thoughts, energy, or body, or when we're talking about somebody else, facial expressions, body language, voice. And your body is usually the first clue that something important is happening. Let me give you an example. Think about the last time that you were anxious. How did your body behave when you felt anxious? If I asked you to make a list of symptoms, you would probably come up with a list which is quite similar to this one. There may be some individual differences, but there's probably going to be a lot of overlap between different people's lists. Now, of course, we want to recognize emotions that we're experiencing, because just like when you're traveling, when it comes to your emotions, it's essential to know where you are in order to be able to chart a route to where you want to go. The second skill is understanding, which means that we can see the cause for emotions and see how they influence our thoughts and decisions. And this, in turn, helps us make better predictions about our own and other people's behavior. The third skill, labeling, which refers to making connections between an emotional experience and the language that we can use to describe it. And here, it's really important to distinguish between related emotions, such as, for example, pleased, happy, elated, and ecstatic. So, why is this accuracy or granularity so important? Because labeling emotions accurately increases self awareness and helps us to communicate emotions effectively. And that in turn reduces misunderstandings in interaction. When we talk about emotions, there's one phrase which really sums it up: name it to tame it. If we are able to label the emotion that we're feeling, we're much more effective in making sure that the emotion doesn't burn inside us. And here is where language teachers can use the classroom and the language they teach to help students enlarge the set of feelings vocabulary that they know, and in this way help them fine tune and regulate emotions in a much better way. The fourth skill, expressing, which means knowing how and when to display our emotions, depending, of course, on the setting, the people that we're with, and the larger social and cultural context. And here, this is where the understanding of these sort of unspoken rules for emotional expression in a given culture or context is useful, because it really helps us find the best way of expressing what we feel and also to modify our behavior accordingly. And the fifth skill, regulating. Regulating is a little bit like dialing up or down your emotions, which I can promise you is a skill that you can learn. This does not mean ignoring inconvenient emotions. Rather, it's learning to accept and deal with them. And here is an exercise which you may want to try out when you are experiencing strong emotions which threaten to overwhelm you. The picture that you can see on the screen at the moment is me a couple of years ago at the start of a presentation that I was making. Um, I'm going to explain the two baskets in just a moment. When I'm about to start a presentation or a training for a group of people, I usually feel a little bit anxious. And now we talked about anxiety a little bit earlier. In my case, anxiety manifests itself in my hands shaking a little bit, my heart is racing a little bit. Sometimes I also feel a little bit nauseous. Okay, so now we come to those two baskets. Imagine that you are anxious at the moment and that you experience the symptoms, the bodily symptoms of anxiety. What you do is you put the bodily symptoms of anxiety into one of the baskets and you put the emotion into the other basket. Now, for me, what happens a lot is that I notice my body doing something. So I will use the basket for bodily manifestations first. So my heart is racing, I'm shaking, I feel nauseous. Sometimes I am able to name the emotion. In this case, it's anxiety, but sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. So I just stay with one basket full and one empty. What's the effect? My brain is busy working out what's going on and the emotion subsides. Some of you will probably know that physiologically, any emotion lasts up to 90 seconds only. So why is it that we feel that it can last for days? Well, it's because we keep feeding it. But if we name it and then don't keep feeding it, it won't start again and again and again. Let's have a look at another activity which you can use in the classroom. The field that you can see is a mood meter, which will help us map out emotions. The four sides of the field represent different levels of energy and different levels of pleasantness of emotions. So let's divide this field into four quadrants. So the green area is for very pleasant feelings, but connected with low energy, such as, for example, what you feel when you are lying in a hammock on a sunny day. Blue is for low energy, unpleasant feelings, such as how you might feel on a dark and rainy day. Red is for high energy, unpleasant feelings, such as, for example, when someone has scratched your car while parking. And finally, yellow is for high energy, pleasant feelings. And of course, there's a certain degree of overlap between the different color zones or the different quadrants. And in the middle, there's sort of a neutral zone. Just to give you an example, I'm definitely in the yellow zone today. I'm very high in terms of energy and I'm experiencing very positive emotions because I'm talking to fellow professionals about a topic that I'm very passionate about. And if we want to be a little bit more specific, and here is some information for language teachers, here are some of the examples of emotions in each of the four quadrants. So you've got pleasant, excited, inspired, optimistic for the yellow quadrant. For the red quadrant, you'll have feelings such as peeved, worried, stressed, furious, etc. For the green zone, at ease, calm, secure, grateful, serene, carefree, mellow. And for the blue zone, blue quadrant, apathetic, sad, miserable, despondent, hopeless, depressed. And here is a modification of the mood meter. What you can do is you can create a classroom mood meter. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to make a life-sized grid on the floor using, for example, masking tape, and mark the colors in some way, whatever is available to you. Each zone should be at least 1 meter by 1 meter large. The second thing that you do is you either assign emotion words to students or ask them to choose emotion words for themselves. You invite students to write their word on the front of a piece of paper, and on the reverse side, they either write a definition or example or an emoji. And then you ask students to tape their emotion words to their shirts. And then you ask students if the feeling that they have on their piece of paper is pleasant or unpleasant. And is this feeling high energy or low energy? And based on their answers, you invite students to stand in the zone that their emotion word belongs to. And finally, you invite students to explain why their emotion belongs in that zone. And if there are disagreements, which is actually quite likely because we all feel emotions differently, lead a constructive, respectful discussion and make sure that students have the space and opportunity for individual expression of their emotion. And here is a mood meter some of you may know, since it has been used in language teaching for decades. For those of you who don't know it, here is how it works. You draw the graph that you can see on the screen on the board, mark where you are, and explain to students why you feel this way on this particular day. Then you invite students to come to the board and to identify where they are. And then in pairs or small groups, students share why they feel this way. Now, remember that may be students who don't want to share. And it's a good idea to give them the freedom to keep this information to themselves. Apart from helping students to regulate their emotions effectively, we're also working here on language. And if we look at the kind of language and strategies which are generated or which are needed in the course of the final discussion on whether an emotion belongs to a certain quadrant or not, the only thing I can think is that it's all effective communication. And this is what our students will need no matter what language they are learning. In addition, as teachers, we can also constructively channel the emotional landscape of our class by choosing appropriate activities for students in each of these quadrants. So, for example, for the yellow quadrant, brainstorming and creative writing. For the green quadrant, building consensus. For the blue one, proofing or editing, or demonstrating empathy. And finally, for the red one, debating or competing. Now, we know that red is a quadrant where emotions are rather unpleasant. But remember that as we're moving from left to right, we increase the level of pleasantness. So we move towards more energizing passion, for example. As educators, but also as parents, we need to demonstrate the ability to identify, to discuss, and to regulate our own emotions before we can teach the skills to other people. Classroom research shows very clearly that where there is an emotionally skilled teacher, students disrupt less, focus more, and perform better academically. But also, where there is an emotionally skilled principal, there are teachers who are less stressed and more satisfied. And this means that all of us, teachers and managers, have our work cut out for us. And this is the end of the presentation.